Alright, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Fantasy Feud. We are doing our starts and sits for this Thursday in the NFL. I'm with Mason. I'm with Paul. We're the Fantasy Feud as usual. And before we get into today's video, like it, comment down below who you're going to start and sit this week, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us out. We're going to post stuff every single day, and we're live streaming on Saturdays from here on out. So if you guys really like our advice, go ahead and subscribe. It helps us out a lot. But we're going to jump straight into things today with our start category today, and we are going straight to the quarterback position. Our quarterback is Justin Herbert against Kansas City. Yes, Kansas City's defense has been really good as of recent, but Justin Herbert is that guy. He's had 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in 3 of his last 4 games, 11 touchdowns to 4 picks. He has been an absolute fantasy star here recently. But I just love Justin Herbert. Everybody knows he's my MVP candidate this year, so Paul's getting mad over there at his dog barking, so maybe let Mason go next and talk about it.
I see the dog in the shadow in the back.
I'm not mad. I'm just trying to figure out what he's barking at.
All right. So, Justin Herbert against Kansas City. I love the start pick. I think he is going to destroy it. Like Stone said, we need him tonight. We need him to do big things. I think it's an easy start, though. I mean, not much to say about it. What do you think?
My take on it, I love Justin Herbert. I think he's going to be talked about as an elite quarterback in the near future. After his impressive rookie season last year, he's continued to do it again this year. I think you actually just brought up the point a little bit ago off camera that he already has 30 touchdowns this year, which is incredible to me to think about. Yeah, I think this is a no-brainer. I mean, obviously he's going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, which is kind of rejuvenated. They found their stride so far through the season. It took them 7 games to start getting it. But I think he can carve up this defense. I foresee another 300 yards and a 3-touchdown day from him.
All right, yeah. Let's move on to the running back position. We got Nick Chubb, someone who hasn't been as high as of recently. Some people might be questioning whether they want to start or sit him. Well, we say start him. It's Nick Chubb still. He's playing against the Las Vegas Raiders, 30th against the rush, and he's due for a game, to be honest. 104 total yards in the last 2 weeks combined. Obviously not what you expect out of Nick Chubb. The guy's an absolute unit. I think this week's an easy start for the guy.
Yeah, like Sean was saying, dude, Nick Chubb, you draft him. He's still ranked a top 2 running back in the league right now, and as far as fantasy standards go. So you might be questioning whether to start Nick Chubb. I have Nick Chubb in the league, and I'm questioning whether I start him or not. But this week against Las Vegas, I think it is the right move. Throw Nick Chubb in your lineup. He is due for a huge game, so let him just run it.
100%. I agree with you. I mean, Nick Chubb, he's one of those guys you draft him in the top 5 of a draft, top 7, somewhere around there. And you expect him just to ball out every single week. I would say that's not been the case this year. There's been a couple times, obviously, whether he's been out for injury. I don't know if he's been on the COVID at all this year, but he just hasn't been, I guess, the same Nick Chubb that we've always come to know. But I think that they're going to have to lean. I guess they don't have to, but Cleveland, I think, they'd be smart to lean on him as a true workhorse with, I was not Alvin Kamara, with Kareem Hunt out again. I think he can kind of be the guy that rights the wrongs of this ship, of all the turmoil that they have with Baker, all the drama inside this locker room. Just give the ball to Nick Chubb, let him grind out a game, and, I mean, you guys will start getting back into contention, I guess, for the AFC North.
Absolutely, and then you can move on to another surefire guy this week, and that's Chris Godwin. He's playing against New Orleans, so some people might be a little scared of him. However, New Orleans is 27th in the pass this year, and, I mean, Chris Godwin, his stats have been pretty, honorable this year, I guess, in every single game. I mean, he's a top, I think, 6 receiver in PPR formats and total fantasy points scored. So Chris Godwin is not someone you should be scared of week in and week out. We think he's going to have a pretty big game this week.
Looking at the teams Chris Godwin's played, when Antonio Brown's been healthy, he's had some lower scoring games. Also, when he's played some good defenses, when he's had some good cornerbacks matching up against him, he's had some underperforming weeks. But like Stone just said, against New Orleans, we can probably expect for Tampa Bay to just carve them up. Last time they played, the Tampa Bay receiving core combined for 58.9 fantasy points. Okay, so look for another big week, guys. Chris Godwin, let's go. Let's win some first week playoff games.
Chris Godwin, in his last 2 games alone, he has 25 receptions on 32 targets. 2 games, 25
That's two
receptions,
pretty games.
32
I
targets,
love it. Give Chris
248
Godwin
yards.
all the love.
He's had 0 touchdowns, which that kind of sucks. But I mean, you've gotten 50.7 fantasy points from him out of 2 weeks.
That's crazy.
That's absolutely incredible. And like you guys just spoke about, he's going up against New Orleans. He might have to contend with Marshawn Lattimore a couple times, depending on if they move him around.
Yeah.
Starting either Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. But I just foresee Tom Brady continuing his little revenge streak at the end of the year. He's mad they lost a couple games. And this offense, I think, is just going to continue to run through Chris Godwin and Leonard Fournette.
Not to mention Mike Evans, for that matter. It's all the guys there.
We just got an update. Leonard Fournette was not seen in practice today.
So, yeah, that could definitely change things and make them rely heavily on the pass game, which they usually do anyways. So,
yeah.
But
or Rojo, baby.
We're gonna move away from your surefire start guys. This one's a little different. It's Mike Gesicki. He's been kind of up and down all year this year. He's played against the Jets already. He scored 10 points against them earlier in the season. 5 catches, 50 yards. Not a bad game. I believe there was a touchdown vultured from a different tight end in that game as well. So I think Mike Gesicki will have a nice little get-back game here against the Jets and do a pretty solid job for you if you're on the fence about starting him.
Yeah, the Jets have been horrible against the tight end this year, guys. I mean, they've given up 36 points to tight end against Atlanta. They've given up 25 points against tight end to Goddard. And then that Week 11 matchup, they gave up 15, which part of it was to Gesicki. The other part of it was that vultured touchdown. I mean, if Gesicki goes out and gets you a touchdown this week, that's all we can ask for. He's been up and down all year long, but I think it is a great start this week.
Something I think benefits him greatly is Jalen Waddle being on COVID now.
Yeah.
I think they're going to obviously look to use Mike Gesicki a little bit more. We've seen it at the beginning of the year. He was kind of a security blanket or whoever's starting quarterback down there, whether it have been Tua or who's the backup, Colts guy, Jacoby Brissett. I think either way he's going to get targeted. Hopefully it actually produces points because I know at one point during the season he had a game with 9 targets and 1 catch or 0 catches or something. So just because he does get the targets doesn't always mean it relates to fantasy. But I think, like I said, with Jalen Waddle going down, I think he has a chance of kind of taking over. Him and Devontae Parker, I think, are going to be the ones to lead this offense.
I'd say, quick honorable mention to Devontae Parker, like you said there at the end there. Devontae Parker definitely will pick up, and I think Devontae Parker is one of the most underrated receivers in the league, so he's going to come out there and look pretty good this week without Waddle in the picture. Moving on to our defense. This one's pretty self-explanatory. It's Dallas. They've been pretty hot as of recently, and they're playing the Giants, who have Mike Glenn at quarterback. The Giants are just not good. I don't have much to say on this. I think Dallas is just a very easy start. If you're holding on to them right now, start them.
Micah Parsons, enough said. Mike Glennon, even more. I think that's just kind of enough right there. I think we can go ahead. Paul, do you have anything else to put the cherry on top?
I do, real quick. So with Dallas, I mean, it's not just in the last 2 games, which they've had 44 fantasy points. They've given up 31 points against them in real life. But over the course of the season, they have 7 defensive touchdowns. 2 of those defensive touchdowns have come in the past 2 weeks. But I mean, like you just kind of mentioned, Micah Parsons, he's an absolute stud. You have Trevin Diggs, who is probably one of the best corners in the league right now, going up against Mike Glennon. Obviously, he's not starting quarterback for a reason. He's a backup. He's been a backup his entire career outside of he first got drafted by Tampa before they went and got Jameis.
But Bears were trying to make him a little bit quarterback. They paid him there a little bit right over there.
Yeah, they paid him for 4 games and then drafted Mitch Trubisky and he sat. But I know Mike Glennon, I do just want to give him a little bit of credit only because I'm not praising him. I'm not saying anything, but he plays and gets this team to play a little bit harder than I think what most backup quarterbacks can and do. I'm not saying that he's going to go out there and score this offense 30 points and he's not going to light the world on fire. But Mike Glennon's also a guy that's going to go out there and make the right reads and make the right plays, and he's not going to make those mistakes, I guess. But in this case, hopefully he does, because then Dallas is going to score points. They're going to get takeaways and turnovers. I mean, they've had 5 interceptions, 3 fumble recoveries, and 7 sacks in the last 2 games. That's incredible stats. So I just want to say, maybe take it with a grain of salt. Mike Glennon might be able to protect the ball, but I still think it's going to be a good game from the New York Giants,
All right.
and Dallas is just going to kind of murder them.
Yep, I agree with that completely. Let's move on to our sit section of the video. We are going to talk about Kirk Cousins. I'm going to let Paul take this one over because I think me and Mason are kind of on the edge here. I think it's like a fence start. I think if you have a star quarterback, obviously you bench Kirk Cousins. But if you're talking about 2 mediocre quarterbacks, I'm on the fence of starting him this week against the Bears. But I think Paul's got a little bit to talk about here.
It's totally understandable. So me, this was the same concept of like when you're trying to start somebody or you're trying to play somebody in a flex, you have like a sleeper, right? Always think about that one guy that might be able to do it. I think technically this is a defensive sleeper, but also Cousins. I I don't think he's going to do amazing things against this team, even though it's a banged up secondary. He has 25 fantasy points in only 4 games this year. He has 6 games under 20 fantasy points, averaging right around 18 his last 2 games against Chicago. I want to say the last game that they had last year was like 33-27, a loss for Minnesota. And then the one prior to that was like 19-16 or 19-14, with Minnesota getting the win. Again, Kirk Cousins hasn't played overly great. He's not out here playing Aaron Rodgers, 4 touchdowns in a game, 300 yards. He's had 250, about 280 yards per game the last 2 that they played. 563 combined, 4 touchdowns and 2 picks. Again, that's kind of mediocre when you're coming at it from a fantasy quarterback perspective. I'd like to get more than 20 points a game. If you're encroaching about that 25 to 27 points, you're starting to get in like elite territory for quarterbacks. Once they hit the 30 is when you have great quarterbacks, and Kirk Cousins just can't get there right now. Unless your league has bonuses for deep touchdowns or like going over a certain number plateau for passing yards, you're not going to be scoring 25 to 30 fantasy points with Kirk Cousins at all this year. I think Chicago, their defense is trying as hard as they can with the little pieces they have. But you also have to think about that defensive line. They're getting sacks. Robert Quinn, he's encroaching the franchise record of 16 and a half. You have Tevis Gibson stepping up, who is also getting to the quarterback. So I think Kirk Cousins is one of the guys you can look at where you guys said, start him. He's been good. He's played well. But I think this is going to be a bad week for him.
I like your points, Paul. I think that's a great argument to make. I do think Kirk Cousins is one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL this year, throwing 27 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He is playing better than a majority of the quarterbacks in the league right now, and that's my opinion. I do believe he can go out against Chicago's crappy secondary, and I believe he can get 25 fantasy points. That's my thought, but it's a divisional game. Divisional games are tough. So, guys, I think we should probably listen to Paul on this one and go ahead and set him if you have that opportunity. All right, let's go ahead.
We're going to move on to the running back position. We got Devonta Freeman. Green Bay is allowing the 10th fewest fantasy points for the running backs, and he's been touchdown dependent for most of the weeks that he's played. So we talked about that before. And Latavius Murray gets the goal line work for the most part now. So it's like, do you even start Devonta Freeman if you have him anymore at this point? Not even just this week, but for the rest of the year. Freeman's going to be in question all year. I think against Green Bay, it's going to be an easy sit.
Devonta Freeman will probably come out and surprise you some weeks, but I'm totally in agreement. Sits Devonta Freeman this week.
I'm the same exact way. Obviously, there's a reason he's on this list for us. He's touchdown dependent, like you said, for having high scoring games. I think he's averaging close to 60 rushing yards a game or what he's playing in. But he got a vulture touchdown by Latavius Murray last week, and that could have put him up a little bit higher than expected. But I think that's going to continue to kind of happen, especially with the absence of Lamar Jackson. Because when Lamar was playing and playing at his best without having the multiple turnover games, we were seeing Devonta Freeman kind of be the same Devonta Freeman of old down in Atlanta.
Yeah, I remember watching him and thinking that I was like, oh, this is like the Freeman of old. This is great to watch. It's good to see him successful again. But now you're gonna see that production regress back down to where it's been, and I think, and yeah, I don't know. It's a shame to see him kind of regress because of that, but it's kind of expected. The Baltimore offense is all over the place right now. Moving on to the receiver, we have DK Metcalf. This poor guy, man, he has just not had a good year, and touchdownless in the last 5 games, averaging sub 60 yards, I believe. It's not good. I think he's getting 3.5 catches, 6 fantasy points a game in that 5 game span. It's just a disaster for a guy that most people kept in their fantasy leagues or drafted high in like the 3rd or maybe 4th round. I'm not 100% sure where he's going, but he was definitely up there. It's a shame to see DK Metcalf not having a good year, but
For a guy that's this explosive, Seattle's finally starting to come on. Russ seems like he's back. He's making plays. He's scoring big. Tyler Lockett seems to be his favorite target right now. Earlier in the year, DK had 24 fantasy points against the Rams, right? So that does look a little promising. But if we go back to Stone's point, since week 10, 4.1 fantasy points. Week 11, 5.1. Week 12, 2 fantasy points. Week 13, 8. Week 14, 6. Not looking great right now, guys. I'm totally in agreement. Let's sit DK Metcalf until otherwise noted. Unless you absolutely have to and you need him to blow up and just go off, well, hey, I mean, stick him in the lineup if you have to, but if you can, sit him.
So I just want to give a little bit of a flip side, I guess, to this. I do agree that he should be a sit at this point, but just a little flip side. The corona outbreak that the LA Rams have had is something that could be beneficial to DK, and maybe that's what he needs. Um, Not having to play against Jalen Ramsey or some of the tough defensive secondary players that they have, he might kind of have that breakout game like we've seen Tyler Lockett have last week, 5 catches for 142 yards. I'm not saying that's the same type of player that they are because we already know that Tyler Headache is dependent upon the deep ball and putting up huge numbers off of little targets or little catch counts, I guess. But I agree with you guys. DK is a sit for me up until he can prove that he deserves to be in a lineup again.
it's crazy to think that his stats are very reflective of how recent Cortland Sutton's been playing. Like that, they have similar stat lines, and that is scary as a DK Metcalf owner because it makes literally no sense as to why that's the case. Moving on to the tight end position, we got Zach Ertz versus Detroit. Yes, any tight end that plays against Detroit, any receiver, any running back, it looks juicy on paper, but don't fall into that trap. Detroit has only allowed 4 touchdowns to the tight end position this year, and Zach Ertz has been kind of touchdown dependent, like if he's had good fantasy games. So it's kind of something to keep in mind. You might need to stay away from him.
Yeah, I'm not a huge component of Zach. I'm not a big Zach Ertz fan at the moment. I did like the early switch to Arizona. I mean, once he was there, he's had some big fantasy days. If you guys really trust it, throw him in there. But as of right now, he's on our sit list for a reason. I don't trust him this week against Detroit.
Kind of following suit with you guys. And I just want to throw this in there as well, Stone, where they have given up only the 4 touchdowns, Detroit. They do give up almost 8 yards per target to tight ends. But again, just last game, Zach Ertz, he was 3rd in receptions on the team. He was 4th in targets and 5th in yards. So when you're kind of decreasing rather than going up with those numbers, rather than being in the top 2, top 3, I just don't foresee him. Andre Hopkins is out now, so maybe this allows him to kind of be more of a security blanket, one less guy to feed over there for them. But I don't think that Kyler Murray is really going to try to go to Zach Ertz much. I think it's going to be this run game. I think James Conner is going to destroy the Lions, and I think Kyler Murray is going to do it as well on the ground this week.
Yep,
I like
agree
it.
with that. Moving on to our last sit, it's Baltimore's defense. All I have to say is Baltimore's defense playing against Aaron Rodgers. Not much more to be said.
You literally stole the words right out of my mouth. Anybody playing against Aaron Rodgers, because he can go out there any given week and throw 3 touchdown passes. Not a great recipe for fantasy defenses. Paul, I know you probably have a little more to say on this.
Yeah, just a couple quick stats. So Baltimore, they have had 7 sacks in the last 4 weeks, but they've only had 1 interception and 3 fumble recoveries. So I don't think you're getting a whole bunch of points out of this team. I
Yeah.
think they're averaging close to 8 or 9 fantasy points a week, which is all right. But it's not going to be what kind of helps you win a week or win a possible playoff game, especially against the red hot Aaron Rodgers. His last 3 games, he has 10 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 1,033 yards. He's averaging 30 fantasy points. That
Nasty.
is what I was talking about with the elite points that you want out of a quarterback compared to what I think Kirk Cousins can bring you this week. Um, but I'm sitting Baltimore's defense. To me, it's a lot like sitting Buffalo's defense last week against Tom Brady.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep, completely agree with that. All right, that's all we got today for starts and sits. If you guys enjoyed today's video, like, comment down below who your starts and sits of the week are. If you have any extras that we didn't mention, and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed today's video. We post videos Monday through Friday on fantasy football content and anything to help you guys out pretty much. If you guys have any questions, comment down below or check into our live stream on Saturday. We're going to talk fantasy tier list. We're going to rate some teams in the NFL, how they've done this year. But if you have any fantasy questions, be sure to ask us. That's for sure. And we are going to get out of here. I'm going to send things over to Mason. He's going to break us out like usual.
Fantasy Few out, baby. Let's go.